what they hoped it would all be about. And you might think that would be disillusioning for me. It really wasn't. I actually find that very inspiring, because in that sort of combination of hope and doubt is the very fabric of how Americans think and how we can take our own view of the time in which we're living. And I think out of that will come real change and real inward-looking sort of tough love.
Still, it's a little problematic, and you have that Pentagon analyst who expresses the idea that if you're going to go to war so that some of our men and women die in war, you better have a consensus from the public on these issues.
Yes, that's Lieutenant Colonel Karen Katowski, who's a remarkable American and gives a kind of a really first-hand look at what it's like to be in uniform at a time where the policies are being driven in ways that are inconsistent with your beliefs. Remember that the film is really driven by Dwight Eisenhower, and it's Dwight Eisenhower who warns us of the kinds of dangers we face in a society when there are motivations for going to war. There are drives toward militarism that are inconsistent with the beliefs of everyday Americans.
Let's actually look in on that famous Eisenhower speech. He was on his way out of office, and look how essentially radical he sounded.
My fellow Americans, this evening I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
Did it surprise you when you went back to the footage of this, just how far Eisenhower went?
It's jaw-dropping. I mean, when I first found this speech, which was really the inspiration for making the film, I believe I can say I had never seen an American president speak as truthfully to the American public before or since, on any subject, let alone a subject as grave as why we fight. And it seems to me things have gotten to a point in Washington where this kind of candor, this kind of deep inward-looking concern that isn't just caught up in the sort of shouting match of Washington politics is just become so rare. And that's why I cling to this moment by Dwight Eisenhower.
He had such profound fears of a system arising in which military contractors got together with Congress to essentially become a kind of a self-perpetuating armaments machine. You argue that that's what is driving America's move to war in many cases.
Yes, I mean, I think it has to be looked at very carefully, and the danger, of course, is that this becomes the stuff of some kind of mad conspiracy theory where we imagine that there are evil geniuses sitting in dark rooms.
Well, that's often how the phrase is used, the military-industrial complex, like a wacko idea.
And it's a big mistake. I mean, one has to go back to Eisenhower and understand his analysis. And he's not a conspiracy theorist, he's not a dove. He's a person who knew very well from the battlefield firsthand how war works, and then he learned firsthand in the Oval Office how policy works. And what he was afraid of was not that there would be some evil genius somewhere. He was afraid simply that your emphasis as a society can shift toward militarism. If you essentially, as he said, if you create an imbalance in and among national programs, that's what he calls it, by, for example, doing what we're doing today, which is taking so much of our national resources and diverting them away from crucial parts of our national life like health, education, transportation, and diverting all of that in the name of security into our defense apparatus, you can almost see the picture. It tilts the society, and it tilts it ultimately toward militarism. Why? Because it suddenly looks like for every problem there needs to be a military solution. Because the military is so overdeveloped and the other parts of your national life have been so emaciated in the process.
But our dependence on this system runs extremely deep. I mean, take a look at a state like California. Its prosperity, the California dream in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was in large part due to intense military spending out there. Jobs depend on this system.
Yes, and if that were an organic phenomenon, it would almost be one thing. But one of the things we discovered, and this does get a little bit shadowy, and it's an unfortunate thing to learn about the defense industry, is that there's a thing called political engineering. You would think if you run a bomb-making company, for example, or you run the company that makes the B-2 bomber, it would be really smart to build the whole thing under one roof, right? Not so. That's not how the defense business looks at it. In fact, a part of the B-2 bomber is made in every single state in the United States. Why? Because what they want to make sure is not just that they get the program going, but that they keep it going. And that whenever that B-2 comes up for review, everybody on the commission is getting a piece of the action.
I believe in this military. I am urging the Senate to support this bill. $66 billion for our men and women in uniform.
Well, I just want to thank the chairman for working with me and adding $100 million to upgrade 10 additional B-1 bombers.
And that B-1 has been a great asset for the projection of power. For
the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the F-A-22 Raptor.
Everybody in that Congress has a job in their home district that they're trying to protect, has a contract they're trying to protect, getting funding that they're trying to protect. So you notice that the Hall of Congress is eerily silent when that thing comes up for review. That's called political engineering. It works against the fabric of our very delicate democracy.